We're live.
Hi. Hi, Samantha. Hi, Tim.
Hello, Christelle. Hi.
How are you?
Now, Samantha is somebody I've met at a few conferences last year. And as you can see from the armoured room that she's in,
My
she
panic
is
room.
very much into voice, audio, and voiceover work. So I suppose, where do we start? How did you get into voiceover work? And yeah, do you enjoy it?
Yeah, it's quite competitive, so you kind of have to enjoy it, really, I suppose, to get there. I started off as an actor.
Yeah.
And then then I needed to earn some money, and so then I left. Oh, it's not so much I left acting, but I went to work at the BBC.
Yeah.
And I was in their promotions department. I started in their promotions department, and that is pretty much where I finished as well. So, and during my time there, I was a voiceover, I was a network director, I was a promo director, and I ended up as creative head on the kids channels, the CBeebies and CBBC. I was creative head on BBC One and places like that, but I ended up for about 10 years on the kids channels. And because I had a background in voice work, I loved the kids channel because it was probably the two channels really, but they're the two best channels too, because we had to interview puppets and animation people, and we were dealing with voiceovers all the time who were quite, out there and quite zany. So it was a lovely job. And then when I left there, I thought, I really want to go back and do voiceover work. So I just decided that that's what I would do as a career, a new career, and that's what I did.
Yeah, we had a comment from Chris on, who's famous for liking Dunkin' Donuts.
Tim is our good friend. Hi, Tim. So, being a voice artist is absolutely fascinating to me. Tell me your favorite. I mean, you might have to explain it to me better than I actually understand it, because when I think of a voice artist, I think of someone who might play a cartoon character, or you might hear their voice on a commercial in the background. Tell me your favorite job you've had and what it actually looks like for you.
Wow. Okay. So probably my favorite job as a voiceover so far, I did a drama thing called Skin. I was, and it's a 3-parter. Oh, well, there were 3 parts to it. A radio drama play. And I was playing a serial killer in it. And I was bizarrely a vegan serial killer. Don't ask. And it started off as a single play, and then I worked with the man who wrote it and directed me, and he decided to write 2 sequels off the back of the very first one. The first one was just me, and then you met my mother in one of them, and you met my psychiatrist, and and it became this trilogy, and that was probably my most loved one, because it was really collaborative, and in those days we could actually meet and actually rehearse in the same room and go to studios and things like that. So I really enjoyed that. And I did earlier this year, I did I was a killer. I did some work for Games Workshop. I was an assassin for them. In fact, I was 2 different assassins, but so I must spend my life being a serial killer. So those ones I've really enjoyed, but actually the bread and butter stuff, of course, is not the audio dramas and the animations. For me, it's the audio. It's things like promotional work or corporate stuff, so that's the bread and butter stuff. It's quite fun.
Okay. Tell us about your promotion, or your actually going into so you go into companies and do meetings, or what does that look like?
Okay, so I do quite a lot of work for the BBC, and I would go into the BBC. I'd be booked to do a single promo or a documentary or something like that. And you in fact, with promos, you very rarely get the script beforehand, but with documentaries you would. And then you go to you go to the studio at a certain time, and you do an hour, 2 hours.
Got
For
it.
promotion, you'd only be there for probably about half an hour, but for a documentary, you might be booked for 3 hours. And then you go into a room just like the one I'm sitting in here. Except for there's a lovely director at the other side of the glass, and a lovely audio engineer, and they make you sound amazing. And you just read, the script to the visuals usually.
That's interesting. Okay.
So, like, what proportion of your time is spent on particular? I mean, I know you narrate audiobooks sometimes. You do
I do.
like production work and games and the rest of it. So, what kind of level of split do you get in terms of voiceover work? And is that common, or is it just a case that your particular voice is for serial killers? They like hiring you.
Yeah. Well, it was just when I decided that I would do voiceover work full time. I knew that the area I knew, of course, best was promotions, because that's
Yeah,
what I had spent my career doing, and I knew how good I expected the promotions voices to be, and how when I booked and directed them, and they were quite specialist. So of course I realized as soon as I decided I was going to be a voiceover, I discovered that my promotions background was great, but it was like
yeah,
this bit of this enormous
yeah,
world out there, which comprised all sorts of things, audiobooks and gaming and corporate work, e-learning work, all of this sort of stuff. So I thought, God, I don't know anything about any of that. So I decided to sort of just learn about it. And it was like going back to college, like doing a mini degree course in things. So I literally tried everything I possibly could. And so I learnt how to do film dubbing. I learnt how to
yeah,
do audiobook narration. And all of these things are really, a different skill set. And so I suppose my split at the moment is, if you get an audiobook, you're on it for the whole week, generally speaking.
yeah,
So then it's quite intense. And if you do a corporate, something corporate, then you're probably in the booth for about, if it's a 10-minute, you're probably in the booth for about an hour doing that. And actually, of course, most of your job, to be honest, isn't spent in the booth. Most of your job is spent networking with people and following up on things or doing a little bit of editing. So I would say that in terms of split between genres, I that's more difficult to work out. But I suspect I probably only spend about 30% of my time actually doing the work.
yeah.
Another 70% getting it.
Yeah, I think that's true of a lot of people.
Yeah.
You're based in the UK. You've
Yes.
been with the BBC. Do you ever do anything international? Have you received any gigs overseas or?
I do. I do a lot of work in the States, actually, because they like my particular voice. So I do a lot of corporate work in the States, and that can come at all sorts of odd times. So, and actually, I've done promotions training for people. So, I've done workshops for people who are sort of training them to be promotions voices. So I do that as well in the States. So yeah, I do quite a bit of work in the States, but it is, as I say, it's night work, because you literally are starting 8 hours later than you would here. Yeah, but it's good. It's good fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they are actually in the States. Sorry, actually, they're in front of us in terms of remote recording. So when lockdown hit in this country, everyone was scrabbling around trying to desperately sort of pull together studios. And I was lucky enough to, I already had one. But in the States, they're used to it because almost all their recording is remote. So they're well set up.
Okay, interesting.
I had some sort of exciting question and now I've totally forgotten it. Oh yeah, I was gonna ask, like, how could if somebody hires like a voiceover artist or somebody to do something for them, how can they tell a good voiceover artist from a mediocre or maybe amateur one, without using any like insults about people? How can they tell the quality of a voiceover artist?
You're right. It's actually quite tough, because anybody could set themselves up as a voiceover artist, and on all these sites, there are various ways that you can find them. So you can go to places like Upwork and Fiverr. You can go to what are called pay-to-play sites, and literally anybody can say, I'm a voiceover, and put some reels up on their play-to-play profile, and you would know actually if their reels were professionally produced, then the chances are they could sound quite good. They wouldn't necessarily be able to reproduce that. So if it was me looking from scratch for a voiceover artist, I would not go to Fiverr or Upwork or any of those places, I would look online. I would either go to a really good agent, because you've got to be good to get on an agent's books, or I would search online, and I might start locally. Depends where I am in the country, but equally that would only be a starting point, because if you're a good voiceover, then you probably have a decent website. And on that decent website are a variety of reels, and probably the majority of voiceovers I know would be very happy to give you a studio demo of your particular, if you could contact them and say, look, I'm really interested. You sound as though you've got the right voice for me. Could you do me a little read of this script, or a little read of anything? Then you would be able to gauge whether their studio was decent enough quality and whether they could actually deliver what you want them to deliver. That's what I do.
Now, did you do any kind of voice training to learn how to? I know it sounds like a strange question, but I know this exists.
Yeah. I mean, I did a lot of it. I mean, having trained as an actor, that was one thing. Because obviously actors aren't necessarily on mics all the time, and also you're taught to project your voice on the stage. Very different. And I'd done lots of voice work through the BBC, so I was kind of used to a mic. But as I said, actually going back, when I discovered, in order to do different kinds of voice work, you have to really be able to use the mic, use the proximity of your voice from the mic. So if I get up quite close, it's a very, very different sound than if I'm back here. It just sounds very different. And you need to be able to learn how to use the mic properly. You need to be able to have stamina in terms of it. You need to be able to interpret the text and be able to pre-read everything. So while you're scanning that script that you're actually voicing, your mind is sort of looking at the script you're getting up to, as it were. So it's two things. You're saying the words, but you're looking a sentence in front all the time, and that takes practice. A lot of practice. Yeah, I've got a coach, and the coach. In fact, I've had a number of different coaches, and they've all been brilliant at getting you to really interpret the text and lift it off the page so that it sounds right.
Okay.
You've also got a podcast as well.
I have.
How do you find podcasting as opposed to your normal kind of voiceover work? Because obviously, I've seen lots of I've gone to podcast movement, lots of podcasting conferences in the past, and there are people who say, "Oh, just do freelance voiceover work." But you're going from the other way, from voiceover to being podcast. How is it different for you from doing normal voiceover work?
It's a really good question, and it's not one I've been asked, but it is something I've thought about. It's quite different, because a podcast is quite a relaxed conversation usually. Even if it's only you're having a conversation with your listener, and so it's quite a relaxed, informal way, in a very different way from something that's scripted. So I decided really early on, although I wanted it to be an informative podcast, so it's a podcast for voice directors, actually, how to work with voice actors. I wanted it to be informative, but I didn't want it to be scripted, because that kind of defeated the object of it. So I just do bullet points and go through them. But when I edit it, I don't edit out all the breaths and the stumbles and the things that go wrong in the way that I would normally if I was. I try and leave it quite loose and quite natural, but again, reasonably high quality, because of course, if I did a podcast where my sound wasn't so good, that wouldn't be such a great advert for what I actually do. But and interviews like this, which I've done a few of those interviews, they're pretty complex actually, because I need them to sound really good. So the person on the other end has to has to have quite a high sound quality as well, quite a high quality sound.
Yeah. I mean, we've got a comment here about, I would have thought during Corona times, being a voiceover artist would be good field to be part of. Is that true, or have you found a lot of other people have suddenly appeared in voiceover world?
Well, right at the beginning, because I had a studio, I was in demand, in that I got quite a lot of work in sort of March, April, and then an unusually high amount, and then it kind of bottomed out because everybody had rushed around getting their home studios set up. So having said that, it hasn't taken the dip that a lot of other things have taken. So I've been really pleased about that. It's something that has been it's been kept going. The only thing is, of course, is that there isn't a lot of adverts. There aren't as many adverts being made. There aren't as many documentaries being made. In certain parts of the media which feed in often to my part of the media, there simply hasn't been stuff that's being made. But there's still an awful lot out there that is being made. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Where do you want to go from here? Do you want to do voiceover bigger elsewhere? What is your goals and aspirations with this?
I think I am trying to. So next year, funny enough, I was goal setting the other day with a mentor of mine, and one of my goals is to actually dial up the promotional stuff, but do that in the States as well. I don't have an agent in the States yet.
Okay.
I work directly with people, and there is an agency that I'm not officially with that often sends me stuff that I audition for, but I haven't really broken into the American market. So I would like to go further on that and do more promotional stuff. I've had quite a lot of success recently directing other people. So again, mostly in the promotions area. So again, that's something that I'm probably looking at expanding into next year.
Okay.
And yes, I suppose, and more audio dramas, actually. I think as audio dramas get up and running again, because they have stagnated slightly, then I would like to do more of that next year as well.
Okay. So coming to the States, does that look like, I mean, would you have to actually fly into New York, Los Angeles, or can you do it from where you are?
It would be amazing. No, I can do it from where I am, sadly. But I'm very happy, obviously, to fly in. Well, it really depends on the it would depend on the job, actually. But what it
Okay.
probably will entail, and the hope is, of course, that that the current pandemic allows us to begin to travel again. I would probably need to go over to do to network properly face to face. And there are lots and lots of voiceover conferences in the States.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of where I would probably start. But I begin to network this side of, but then actually go over and meet people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's always. I've gone to quite a few podcast movements. It's like a huge US podcasting conference. I think even something like that might be worth going to, because there's always lots of podcasters who are looking for professional intros to their shows.
That's true.
Though they're a little bit like indie book authors in as much as whatever the minimum amount of stuff they can pay for something.
Well, that's true. I mean, there are some big podcasts that need that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But actually, because I did think of that, actually, doing podcast intros. But when you look into it with more depth, unless you're doing something really jazzy and you're doing something that will be, I don't know, an intro tune or something where somebody's singing, really what podcasters want is something that is flexible, that you can change up and that you don't always have to use the same one all the time. So in a lot of ways, there's a limit to podcast intros, because I think people want that flexibility to be able to do lots of different things. And once you've got it, you've got it. You can't really do much with it.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Okay, so I have another question. With audiobooks, do you generally just read all of the characters yourself and try and put on a voice for them, or do you work with other people who and do they kind of stitch the files together? How does it work in general with audiobooks?
In general, there are audiobooks that use different audio actors in them, and certainly that is something that is becoming, I wouldn't say more common, but it's becoming more of a thing, almost like an audio drama, so using different people. But generally speaking, the narrator takes on board the characters, and different narrators, of course, bring different levels of characterization. So, and of course, it differs for a book. So if you're doing a children's book, for instance, you might do broader characterizations. with adult books on the whole, they're really interesting, and I listen to a lot of audiobooks, a lot of fiction. I very rarely listen to factual books. And I've noticed that the ones that are more effective for me as a listener are when they just do a sort of nod to an accent, nod to an Irish accent, nod
Yeah.
to a male accent if it's a female narrator, because it allows me to, for me, it allows me to not be taken out of the book, to think, oh, that's a odd accent there, or that, that
Mm.
it's just a kind of, that there's a sort of delicate touch to it. Having said that, if you had an audiobook that had 10 different characters all from Devon, that would be really tricky because you'd have used up your Devon accent on one. So you'd have to really work hard to differentiate the characters. So it comes less through an accent and more through a sensibility, a sort of characterization of somebody. And yeah. So, but yeah, you do all the characters. That's why they're really time-consuming audiobooks, because when you're prepping for them as a narrator, you get the manuscript through and you read it just as a punter to kind of feel the book, to know what you're up against. Then you go through it again and you notate it up. And the more characters, the more complex it is, because you're highlighting, because in a conversation you might have 5 different people, and then the author doesn't always say, and Jim said, then Joan said. They're often, they've left that bit out, and so you have to go through and highlight different characters in different colors, say, or whatever your particular thing is, so that when you get to them, that that's Jim and that's Joan and that's Susan and that's Bill, and you can see that immediately on the page, that but it's so time consuming. It's incredibly time consuming, because you've got to dream up the characters, you've got to dream up what they're going to sound like, and then you've got to be able to effortlessly just read it as you're doing it. It's very time consuming prep as much as anything.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question from one of our viewers, and I think you briefly answered this, but she's wondering how you got into doing serial voice artist. How did you become a serial voice artist? Why did you start as another type of voice artist?
Yeah, really. I suppose I started as a promotions voice artist, so that's promos and trailers. The closest thing to that is probably adverts, but actually they're not that close. And then documentary voices. Those sort of TV voices are similar. But I had to learn how to become an audiobook narrator. It comes with its own challenges, and I had to learn how to do e-learning, which is a very specific kind of a voice. And corporate depends on whether they want a formal corporate, whether you're financial institutions might want quite a formal, they might somebody to talk in a really kind of straightforward, formal way. You've got to imagine what character you are. Actually, even with corporate, you've got to think, okay, am I part of the company? Am I outside of the company? Am I a consultant they've brought in? Who am I? You have to kind of mine for clues in the script. And then somebody else might have a really kind of informal corporate script where they're trying to make their listener really relaxed and jokey or emotionally charged. So to go back to the original question, I had to learn how to be able to deliver different types of voiceovers. Yeah.
I think we're running out of time, but Tim, I have a question for you. Do you have something behind your head that we should know about?
This is a non-running thing. I've got.
So every Tuesday, Tim puts up some kind of wisdom for us, and literally now it says "Seek wisdom."
Wisdom. You want some wisdom from me?
And leave us with a bit of wisdom, Samantha.
Okay.
What is
my bit of wisdom is, if you are ever doing any voice work, that's if you're appearing on a podcast or you are asked to do any sort of speaking, this is your best friend, because being really well hydrated, and I have to actually start, I used to think it was like 2 hours, but actually I have to start the previous day, which means because your whole body needs to be hydrated. Those clicky, sticky mouth noises that everybody just likes. And actually, I think they're a bit of a fetish as well. But anyway, that's a completely different podcast. But, so if you drink enough water, you can eradicate those, so you don't make those sort of sticky mouth noises.
Peas and things like that.
Yeah, plosives. So yeah, this helps. But you also need to be able to, you
also not talking directly into the mic helps.
Yeah, I'm speaking just off the mic. Yeah, you're absolutely right. If you don't sort of go in there, but in terms of career, it actually not so much a voiceover career. Any career is it starts off awfully slowly. You've got to be really dogged if you're going to change direction. I kind of gave myself, hilariously looking back, I gave myself about 3 months, 6 months max. I'd be fine. Takes an awful long time to establish yourself in a new career, I can tell you that.
Yeah. And you had, I imagine you had to get an agent as well to be able to be successful.
Well, no, actually. I do do have an agent, but and a number of agents, actually. People work to a number of different agents, and in fact, in the States, I can have as many as I like, actually. But I do have an agent, a few agents, but actually, you find most of the jobs yourself these days, because it used to be, if you go back 15, 20 years, you're absolutely right. It was almost all agents, but actually, if you you do an awful lot of networking, reaching out to people. LinkedIn is an amazing resource, and actually almost all the social media platforms are. And you just you've got to really understand where you add value. So I've got a very specific kind of a voice, and I know who is likely to book me, and I know you're not likely to book me if you're wanting a nappy advert. I'm not a girl next door kind of voice. I'm a different kind of a voice, and so I market myself accordingly. So it's really important to understand where you sit in the whole. I suppose that's the same with any job, actually. You've got to know where your unique abilities lie.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So to avoid Christelle having to start working as a voiceover artist, because she'd be late for her current job, I'm going to say
would you like to, Christelle?
Oh my God. I would absolutely love to. I live in Southern California. Let's go.
You're made. Just proximity is good.
Just proximity. It's right here.
So thanks so much for being on the show, Samantha. And it was a great show. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for your wisdom today. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
This is terrifying for me.
I've made more money in the last 3 years than I did in the previous 7.
Cliche shit,